a sea of modified Porsches, Gunther Werks burst onto the P-car scene in 2017 with their interpretation of a car Porsche never built, the 993 GT3 RS. They called it the 400R, and it was built on what some may say is the best Porsche 911 ever, the 993, the last air-cooled. Next up for Gunther Werks was the Speedster. But tonight, what I'm about to go drive is something that may be the evolution of the iconic 993 GT2 Evo, a car that they call simply the Gunther Werks 993 Turbo. So if Darth Vader drove a 993 Turbo, this would probably be it. It's a streetable race car that's been put together by the talented team at Gunther Werks under the direction of its owner, Peter Nam. He established a team of people that were super passionate and dedicated with a no-holds-barred build to build the best version of a 993 Turbo. The drivetrain, the engine, the heart and soul, the twin-turbo 4-liter built by Jeff Gamroth at Rothsport Engineering. What puts that 750 horsepower to the ground, the contact patch, the suspension, the wheel and tire combo, was Kerry Eisenhower at ERP Suspension. And then the development drivers of Patrick Long and the guy I spoke to, Billy Johnson, the two talented race car driver engineers that put all the development miles on it on both road and track to make sure this car does what most other modified streetable track 911s don't do. The trifecta of being fast, usable and handling on both the road and track. Usually you might get 2 out of 3 of those. And I've driven a lot of streetable race cars that are always too much of a race car for the street, that actually don't perform in stop and go traffic. I've had this car now for 3 days. I've put a couple of 100 miles on it. I've been in stop and go traffic on the 5 freeway in second gear doing 15 miles an hour. And it is easy to drive. Surprisingly, the clutch is very lightweight. The gearbox is actually a 996 GT3 gearbox, which is a joy to shift at any speed. But the real joy with it is sat in bumper-to-bumper traffic, not that there's any joy in that, but not shaking and juddering like a lot of cars do. And then once you find enough open road to unleash it, this thing is a real beast. It gets real rowdy real quick. So here it is, the heart and soul of the Gunther Werks twin turbo. Now, I made a couple of little notes because I spoke to Jeff Gamroth over at Rothsport about what makes this build so special. I didn't really want to miss any facts. We know we got the flat fan, we know what that does, but I wanted to go over some specs of what makes this a true 4-liter. 80.4 millimeter crank, 102.7 millimeter Marley custom pistons, we got Carrillo rods, we got Garrett twin turbos, and the real key that makes this turbo snappy, throttle responsive, and punchy with no lag is the 6 individual throttle bodies. Now Jeff went to great design on this engine to make sure everything sort of functioned harmoniously. And what that means is when you're behind the wheel, you're not waiting for boost to spool. There is no turbo lag. This thing just cracks. It snaps, cracks, and puts the power down in any gear. The other day I was cruising on the freeway in 6th gear, and yeah, I could have downshifted 5th to 4th because it's a real joy, you know, putting in that Sachs Motorsports clutch, which is not heavy at all, engaging a gear on that 996 GT3 transmission, and dropping it a couple of cogs, and just getting right in that boost. But I thought, let me see how it is in 6th gear, cruising around 70 miles an hour. I just gradually gave it a little jab and then floored it. This thing's got so much torque that you actually don't really need to shift gears. It feels like a real muscular and torquey. But Jeff had worked a lot of magic to get it to that point. This didn't just happen overnight. It's the evolution of getting 750 horsepower, and they tell me there's possibly more on tap, out of this power plant here, and actually making it usable in everyday real-world driving situations. I'll go through a few more notes that he said. You know, it's got a custom exhaust. This thing is rowdy. It's the test mule. The production car obviously will have some sound deadening to sort of get rid of that real loud engine noise inside. But everything that's done on it is super custom. You know, it's got the intercooled heads, but it's just something that is a real joy to drive. And they spent a lot of time tuning this Motec, you know, system of boost versus throttle and where the power comes on. Guntherworks 4-liter turbo test mule that I'm driving. This is the shakedown development car that Guntherworks is sort of at the end of its development before this car actually goes into series production. Making 75 of these, I'm sure a bunch of them have already been allocated and sold. With this being the shakedown development test mule, engine built by Gamroth, suspension done Kerry Eisenhower, I mean, it really is a streetable race car. The development drivers who are doing all the shakedown development test miles are race car drivers Patrick Long and Billy Johnson. I'm fortunate enough to get behind the wheel of this test mule. It is raw, it is rowdy. There's no sound deadening, we've got turbo whine, there's no sound insulation. It is rowdy, it is noisy. The production car will have the same drivetrain that this has, but there'll be some sound deadening. There'll actually be an exhaust system that muffles the sound. This basically has no muffler on it. So when you get on the loud pedal and drop the gear, one of the magic parts of the Guntherworks Turbo is the wheel and tire combo. Guntherworks designed and manufactured their own wheels. 3-piece bolt together, carbon barrel, magnesium centers, 18 by 11 on the front, 18 by 13 on the rear. The front's running this Continental sticky 295 35 18-inch tire. When I spoke to Billy Johnson earlier on and asked him about the setup, he said a lot of it was based on the contact patch, obviously, of the rubber to the ground. A 295 front is really wide, and he was telling me, yes, the barrel is lightweight, but what really worked was the combo of the bespoke Continental tire with the rigidity of the carbon barrel, putting that contact patch to the ground, 11 on the front, 13 on the rear, with a super duper meaty 335 soft sticky Continental tire on the back. Back brakes are Brembo 4-piston caliper. On the front, these anchors which scrub all this speed off are Brembo 6-pot calipers. So it's a combination of the suspension geometry, the wheel and tire contact patch, the steering rack, and the lightness of all these components that have been tested, adjusted, and retested. steering is perhaps one of the sharpest elements of the car, and it takes a little bit of getting used to straight away because it is so direct. It's like blatant turn you there. It's razor sharp. And one of the phenomenal things about this turbo test mule, other than the steering and the drivability, is the mechanical grip that it has. The only slight Achilles heel to this car, the way I see it really, is the turning radius, and it's all because of those big 11-inch front wheels and 295 tires. And the way this car has been set up, you know, it does not tramline. You know, it's great on all road surfaces. I spoke to Kerry that did the actual suspension setup, and he told me the greatest thing about this project that both him and Jeff Gamroth worked on, and they've been buddies for over 40 years, was the fact that they were allowed to develop this car to its maximum potential. Peter, the owner at Gunther Works, basically gave him carte blanche and said, just make it as good as you can make it. So it was a no compromise build. It wasn't built to some race car series spec. So these guys basically, I guess, had a blank check and an empty piece of paper to create what they see as the evolution of the GT2 Evo race car for the street. But here we'll experience late braking through the gearbox, down to fourth, down to third, super stable, no nosedive, no drama. Just smoothly through the gearbox and back to gas. So it's all business up front under this carbon fiber front hood with this very racy cooling duct feeding fresh air into this front radiator. Got to remember this is both oil and water cooled. Let's not forget test mule. We got the big battery in the center. We got the JRZ external canisters right here. This is three-way adjustable. This is part of the trick magic is the suspension setup. This does actually have a nose lift kit on it, which does give us a fighting chance at ground clearance coming in and out of these kind of steep curved driveways. As it's a streetable track car, we do have our little toe strap right here. Gunther Works is making 75 of these, which is quite a lot. They did 25 of the coupe and they did 25 of the Speedster. Gunther Works test mule, this car is stripped out. It's raw. You know, the final production examples will be to Gunther Works high bespoke spec, like the Savile Row Sioux, where everything is made to measure. But on this test mule, you know, it's just putting the shakedown miles on it, approximately 10,000 miles. So there is no rear seat, there is no sound deadening. This thing is just raw, full function. Kind of like the race car that it's sort of inspired by, the GT2 Evo. With a full carbon fiber body, the Gunther Works 750 horsepower turbo tips the scales at 2,700 pounds. All right, so stepping into it, actually pretty standard 993 fare up to that point. We got the prototype on the sill with the carbon threshold. This awesome shifting 996 GT3 transmission, 60/40 diff, carbon wheel. Here's our nose lift button. We can turn it on, fire it up the Motec system. Here's our suspension tuning, comfort, sport and track, just a turn of the knob away. And then let's see how it starts up. So as this is a test development mule car, it's pretty raw on the inside. It's got the Recaro race bucket seats, with the 6-point harness. It's got some strut bracing back there. It's got a lot of exposed goodies, no sound deadening, but we do have a carbon dash and we do have carbon functional door panels. This level of trim will obviously go up once customers spec their own car. We've got an external kill switch there, we've got an internal stop kill switch here, we've got a fire suppressant system, and that's pretty much it, other than electric windows. Let's see if they work. You're not aware of 750 horsepower. It's not like getting in a Carrera GT where everything's sort of tense, you know. The way this car shifts, the weight of the clutch, the travel and the biting point of the clutch, it's easy to operate. You know, it literally is just like feather touch, let it out, away you go. It's that simple. There's no mega lightweight flywheel that feels like it's gonna stall out, or small clutch that you have to sort of slip, or anything special or different. Just like at this speed, it's really, really usable. Kind of mind-boggling, and I would assume difficult to find the limit of where this car is at unless you're on the track, because the speeds it gets up to, and as quick as it gets there, you really need to adjust your whole way of thinking and your whole lateral vision as to what you're coming up on or what you're driving by. Ticking all the sensors, like all great driving cars do. Sensors are fully engaged at all times. The way this thing revs, it doesn't rev like a conventional turbo. You know, sometimes turbos I feel are lazy. This, you know, sort of feels like a naturally aspirated car the way it revs, which is one of the real gems of this drivetrain, is the flexibility and ultimately the usability. Well, the best way to use this car, you've got to work up to it. It's not a car you just get in and floor it. It's a car that does intimidate when you first get behind the wheel, especially when you plant your foot. You've got to make sure there's plenty of open road ahead and you're pointed in the right direction. The great thing about the Gunther Turbo is it feels great at any speed in any gear. You know, it's usable, like just cruising in the flow of the traffic. It's easy to modulate. You can just keep it in 6th gear. There's so much torque. You're not constantly worried about having to downshift. You're not worried about the gear ratios being too low. Remember, that was my pet peeve in the ST. You know, these gear ratios, the greatest thing about it is the power band is available from down low all the way to the 7,500 RPM rev line. But the way the gear ratios are matched, there's no real loss in power when you upshift or downshift. Right there with 6/5, 4th, right back into the power. You know, it's just give it as much throttle as you dare for the open road and flow of the traffic. So it's usable performance. My pet peeve with a lot of guys that call them streetable race cars is they're always slightly on the wrong side of being too much of a race car for the street. And what Gunther has done here is it's a perfect blend of putting a team together, starting with Jeff Gamroth on the 4-liter, the true 4-liter turbocharged, twin turbocharged engine. But really it's just the fact that it's a perfect balance of usable performance added to a transmission that is suited to the power delivery of the car with a suspension that's able to cope with that much power, or not. All wrapped up in this sexy wide-bodied silhouette. Would I want to own this car? Well, interestingly, the 993 has never been my favorite generation generation of 911s. I only own one myself, but 993 GT2, let's not forget, was the first GT2. And the 993 GT2 Evo is a holy grail car, of which only 11 were made. And yet somehow Gunther Werks has trumped that. We're actually making 75 of these, but they've made a better car. This has more power. It's raw analog feel, but with sort of modern day performance, without all the driver aids of a modern day car. This is still manual, 6-speed, 2-wheel drive. It's raw, but it's probably just what you want out of the ultimate 993 twin turbo.